And then my editor got a handle on it and she said, "You know that character? Can you please kill her?"
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Beyond the Manuscript. As always, I am your host, Cooper Anderson, coming to you from my very own library pocket dimension. And if you like what I do here, please, for me, hit those four little buttons that helps me do what I love, which is talk to you lovely folks about books. My guest today is a YA author with a love of all things fantasy. She has spent several years living and working in Chiba, Japan, and now currently resides in London as a librarian. With an undergraduate degree in Japanese literature and an MA in creative writing, she likes to spend most of her time studying, gaming, and doing origami. Here today to talk about her Rebel Sky series, please help me in welcoming my guest, Miss Sei Lin. How are we doing today, Anne?
Hi, it's good to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, I was very excited. You're like the best kind of books. Yours was recommended to me by an author friend between that we share, and yeah, I started reading it. I think like 2 days ago, and I'm already halfway through. So yeah, I was really excited to get you on the podcast. Great. To kind of get us started today, can you tell us all about your book, Rebel Skies, its sequel, Rebel Fire, and if you can, anything in the final book of the trilogy?
Right. So Rebel Skies, the short answer is that it follows a girl called Karara, and she lives on this floating banquet hall in the sky, where she has this ability to control paper with her mind. She lives with her best friend Haru, who is the only person who knows this. She's been told to sort of keep this power under wraps, but she doesn't do a good enough job of it, evidently, because uh, one of the characters, Himura, comes looking for her, but before he can really proposition her to join him or to do anything, their restaurant is attacked by this giant origami dragon. It sort of busts through the walls, and the whole restaurant has to evacuate. And during this evacuation scene, Farah's best friend is really badly hurt. So she ends up tagging along with Himura, who claims that if she joins this sky ship that he's part of, he can take her to the sky cities where there's somebody who can save her best friend's life.
Mm.
Um, and that's a short uh, introduction to Rebel Skies. The long introduction is that Clara lives as a crafter, which are these people who can control paper, and she comes out into this world to try and save her best friend's life, and she gets wrapped up in these questions about what are these paper monsters really, because uh, as far as people know, they are these sort of wild, untamable things that have gone
Mm.
mad and attack people. In the prologue, Himura is telling the story of how his home was attacked with this giant paper tortoise, and it just like crushed everybody, and it crushed all the
Mm-hmm.
buildings. And so when Karara joins Himura, not only does she get wrapped up in a quest to save her best friend, but also in the quest to understand uh, these paper creatures, and also she gets wrapped up in the wider political machinations of this world, which is full of these kind of rival factions and this empire which is keeping down uh, smaller cultures, smaller groups.
One of the things that really intrigued me when our friend Morgan was kind of pitching this book to me was that you had an origami magic system, and I'm immediately a sucker for that. It sounds amazing. Also, I don't know if you've ever seen this or not. There's a very famous early 2000s anime called Read or Die, and it's about this it's like this. I think it's a librarian woman where she has a magical powers where she can kind of control anything out of paper. And there was like an OVA that I saw way back when I was a kid, and I was like, "That's the coolest thing ever." Especially because there was like one scene where she like is in trouble, and she like runs over to an ally who is like a mercenary who kind of does anything for money, and you know that she doesn't have a weapon on her. She reaches into his pocket and pulls out like a sword made out of like $100 bills, and I'm just like, that's the coolest thing ever. So I was immediately hooked.
You mentioned Read or Die, and that's one of the things that I've also seen, and yeah, it's a big inspiration but behind the paper crafting because all the crafters, they each of them have sort of paper on them in some form or other. So Himura has a bracelet made out of paper, and another character later on will have like a belt made out of paper, and they
Mhm.
always keep it on them, and then they just whip it out and create these amazing things.
Yeah, it's just a cool idea. I think it's a really cool idea. So, can you tell us a little bit how you planned out something as massive as a book trilogy?
Um, that question is bringing back war flashbacks. So I like to consider myself a plotter rather than a pantser,
Mhm.
or I know I think George R. R. Martin says an architect or a gardener,
A
which
gardener. Yeah,
is
it's a garden
yeah.
figure. Yeah, exactly. Well, to be fair, for our listeners at home, the difference would be like, I know what kind of happens next, but I'm not really planning too far down the future, as opposed to planning every single plot point and then kind of discovering as you get to those plot points. Those are the two big differences between styles of writing.
Yeah, that's really well put. That's put better than I could explain it. Um, but I like to call myself an architect whose ideas always get like overrun by weeds. So
Mm.
I like to plot things out, but then things always inevitably get in the way and it just crumbles to nothing. So when I was starting this series, I knew that was going to be a trilogy. And so I wrote the first book in its entirety. And then I plotted the second and the third book by sort of dividing it up into chapters. And then, okay, chapter one, this happens, and chapter two, that happens, and then chapter three, all the way until got to the end for both books. And that was fine when I went to pitch this book to my agent. And she was like, yes, this is fine. Okay. And then my agent went to the publisher to sell these books as a trilogy. So we sold them as a 3 book set.
Mm. And
And
that's really difficult to do these days, right? Just to sell a publisher on 3 books, let alone just one, right?
yeah, especially because it's a continuous story, which is
Mhm.
like, sort of going out of fashion. They quite like things to be standalone these days.
Mm.
But somehow she managed to do it. I have to probably send her another thank you card after this. But somehow she managed to get the publisher to buy the 3 books, and the publisher was like, "Fine, that's great. 1 book in your outlines, that's fine." And then my editor got a handle on it, and she said, "You know that character? Can you please kill her?" And it's like, but my other outlines, everything is crumbling. I need her.
It's always fun when you have somebody who's in the industry, probably has, like years and years worth of experience, and they just drop like a hand grenade in the middle of your manuscript, and you're like, what am I supposed to do now? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. My editor is lovely, and but yeah, she asked me to make some significant changes, and it was like pulling threads out of a tapestry where now I had
Mm.
this sort of mess of threads and I had to reweave it all together.
Do you think that was the right choice to do? Like, do you think like her advice was correct?
Oh yes, definitely. I think I looking back, I definitely see where she was coming from.
Good. Okay. Yeah, because that is one thing I try to tell people here that every so often people will run into an editor to where they want to make the best version of your book how they would make it, when really their job is supposed to be the best version of your book. Not what they would do, but what you were supposed to do with how to make it better. So that's good. I'm glad, it was something as big as killing a main character. It pays off, that it is actually the right choice to do. Next question is, what is the hardest origami thing you've ever tried to make?
That's an interesting question. So I would say it's rabbits. And the thing is, I've worked with kids sometimes and I do origami workshops. And we usually do butterflies because they're the easiest thing for kids who've never done origami to just do very quickly. And I thought to myself, well, I've been doing origami for a long time now. Surely I can do a rabbit again. I mean, this time I couldn't do it before, but this time I can do it. And I couldn't do it.
Mhm.
I actually have you probably won't be able to see this if you're listening to this on stream, but I have this, um,
Hey.
it's almost there. It's not quite, but yeah, I looked at so many different instructions, and some of them you need to start with a triangle. Some of them you want to start with a rectangle, and all of them I don't understand what's going on with the head.
It's well, you should know, it is a million times better than anything I could do. Like, it I have a distinct memory of when I was, like, a kid, my dad was trying to teach me how to do cranes. Like, he was big into origami, and he was doing crane stuff, and there's something just uniquely frustrating when you're a child, and you see a parent do something, and then you try it with your little six-year-old fingers, and like it doesn't work, and you melt down almost instantly when you're like, it I folded it the same way he folded it and it didn't work. And yeah, there's something really funny about that.
I will say that trying to do origami practically with my own hands makes me both irrationally jealous and also I admire the crafters in Rebel Skies for on one hand they can do some amazing things like they can do like dragons and create these amazing birds and things like that. But on the other hand, the fact that they can do it with their mind is cheating, I think.
So this next question I have is about your use of language in your books. So other than proper nouns, how do you balance the use of like English and Japanese and things like your world building and the world's culture, everyday expressions, stuff like that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I don't know why, but for some reason that question has triggered a memory of. Have you ever seen Pokemon, the early seasons of Pokemon?
Yeah, of course.
I don't know if you remember this, but there was a very early, I think, meme about this instance where Rock is offering somebody rice balls, and
Yeah, it's onigiri, yeah,
yeah, it's onigiri,
and they say
and
it's a donut. I remember
yeah.
this so clearly, and I remember the memes from this. But yeah, so they're offering, like, a rice ball or an onigiri, and they're like and I think it's Ash, and Ash just goes, "Mmm, jelly donuts, my favorite."
Yeah. Sorry, I know localization is a different thing, but I don't. For some reason that question has brought that memory to the surface. Um, but yes, to properly answer your question, it was, I think, a choice, and I don't think that there's a right or wrong answer to this. Um, for me, where that's in some cases it was quite easy because there is no English equivalent. So things like kimono or katana, there isn't really an English equivalent, so you just go with that
Mhm.
word. And then
Also,
for
those are kind of culturally throughout pop culture now. Like,
yeah,
people who have, is some inkling of what Japanese culture is, they know what a kimono is, or at least the concept that it's just like, a floor length robe for ceremonial purposes, and a
yeah,
katana is a certain style of sword and stuff like that.
yeah, yeah, that's right. So for those, it was quite easy. For others, I either tried to go with either the English or I would have both, so that people could pick up through context clues what the word was.
Mhm,
And I think part of the reason why I made that decision is the target audience. So Rebel Skies is for ages 12 and up. So it's aiming at those people who are kind of coming out of MG and then dipping their toes into YA for the first time. And it's it's a bit of an underserved age group. So,
mhm,
but for that age group, you can't really sort of pelt them with words that they don't know. So I try to use the unfamiliar word and then use the word that they're familiar with together. So, for example, in one scene, one of the characters brings them something to eat, and she's like, "Ta-da! Beef and lotus root soba," and the other character's like, "This is just plain noodles. Where's the beef?" And uh,
Yeah.
and so, like from that exchange, you can even you don't know what soba is, you can like pick up that, oh, it's a noodle dish.
Very good. And that's honestly one that's a skill to navigate on when to do that and how frequently to do that. But also, it's also a really good, I think, service to readers, especially that age range, because that's how kids learn. Like kids are learning through context, not even just through another language, but just even their home language, right? That's, they learn through context what new words mean and stuff like that. So that's really cool. I quite like that.
Yeah, definitely. There is also the fact that there are no, there's no Japanese honorifics in this, and that was
Yeah.
a hard decision to make. I didn't really know which way to go because I feel like there's something you lose. There's a nuance to Japanese honorifics that isn't really present in English, and there's like a nuance between these characters' relationships that you can kind of lose. Um, but in order to understand that nuance, you have to understand how Japanese honorifics work. And especially in a book aimed at this age range, it wasn't
Mm.
really possible for me to keep the narrative tight while like explaining how these honorifics work.
Yeah. From my very limited understanding of the language, it's kind of showing like not only like levels of respect, but it's also kind of you can also use it for like titles. Like the phrase that everyone kind of knows is sensei, which could mean teacher, but it could also mean like doctor as well. And so it's kind of like a title of a level that you kind of reach through like education or stuff like that. But I can kind of see where if you're coming from a culture that doesn't have that in their own language, you would probably spend more time explaining what that is rather than just enjoying the story.
Yeah, I did try to sort of emulate some of that with the English honorifics that we have. So like people always refer to Himura as Mr. Himura
Yeah.
with the title, and then there's one instance where a character calls their captain just Sakurai, and then someone like corrects him and says Captain Sakurai. So I tried
Yeah.
where I could to have that sort of there's levels of nuance with the English language.
So I've also lived and worked in Japan for a number of years, and I'm curious as to what your experiences there were like. Well, what are some things that really impacted you the most? What did you learn while living abroad in such a unique culture?
I had a great time in Japan. It was really great, and I wish I could go again. Now that we're post-pandemic and people could travel
Hmm.
again. Yeah, I so my experiences with Japan are twofold because I went as a child once to visit a family friend, and then I went again later as an adult, and then I lived there for several years. And as a child, I have I remember my mum getting very angry at me because I didn't want to eat sushi. And in my defense, the place that we went to for sushi, it was not the raw fish, it was the wasabi because they
Mm.
served the sushi with the wasabi already
Hmm.
there, and not as like a dipping thing.
Was it one of
Um,
those where, like, they hide it underneath, like, of the piece of sashimi?
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, that was a
yeah,
big
that's
surprise
right.
for me the first time I went to, one of those little, sushi bars where they have the rotating track that goes
Yeah.
around the place. So, was there anything unique that you did while in Japan? So, I know you lived in Chiba, but did you get to do all of the touristy things, like go to Osaka, Kyoto, Tokyo, Okinawa, any place like that?
Yeah, I managed to go to Tokyo and Kyoto. Both are amazing in completely different ways.
Mhm,
So Tokyo, feels like incredibly futuristic, incredibly metropolitan, and then Kyoto feels like going back in time and visiting all
mhm.
these amazing shrines and these beautiful landscapes. So yeah, I recommend both, going to both, but for different reasons. I also went to Nara while I was in Kyoto, and I don't know if you fed
Yeah.
the deer. They,
Yeah, I've done that. So, in case people who don't know this, if you go to Nara in Japan, there is like packs of just like wild deer that just kind of go around this really really big shrine, and they've been trained to where if you give them like these little treats that are available, they bow to you, and then you feed them. The thing is, until you run out of treats, and then they start getting real pushy right after that. Yeah. So one thing for me, from my very limited taste, kind of the culture is one, everyone there was super nice and polite, but also, um, regardless of where you kind of come from, where you grew up, you still feel those same kind of like societal rules that everyone is agreeing to follow.
Yeah, it's yeah, you do get that sense that everyone kind of knows what they're doing, and everything is in its right place, and yeah, you just kind of slot yourself into that stream and you go along with the flow there. And yeah, I'd love to go again. The people are super friendly. Yeah, everyone's polite. It's very safe. Yeah, it's really great. I always fret that I'm slightly too blunt. This awful feeling comes over me that, oh, am I being overly familiar when I talk to people? And then
Mm.
sometimes I will get that feeling, and then I'll pull back, and then I'll worry, oh, am I being so polite that I come across as distant and standoffish? So it's like a hard needle for me to thread, but I think that's a me problem because I also have the same problem in the UK as well.
So I'm quite a little bit taller person. I'm a larger person than the average Japanese fella. So I kind of embrace the fact like, okay, there's no hiding the fact that I'm different, but I can be like a positive and unique example for like an international visitor to the country. And because I lived in a very, very rural area down in Kyushu, there was a lot of times where I was like the little kids I was teaching, I was like their first introduction to like a real life foreigner. Yeah, so I was like, okay, I'm definitely already different, but now I can be a good kind of different. I want to, be a positive example for a lot of people. All right, next question. It's kind of a serious one. If you could give advice to your younger self, what would it be?
I would probably try to memorize the lottery numbers and then tell my younger self the lottery numbers.
All right, like
Um,
here's the winner of the next 3 Super Bowls, and you
yeah,
just put everything you have on the
yeah. There's all your problems gone. There we go. But no, but seriously, I would probably tell my younger self not to worry so much. I'm quite
Mhm,
anxious, and especially in regards to writing, not to sort of fret about things, because at the end of the day, it's not the end of the world if sort of a deadline is missed. Or if somebody doesn't like your book, if you get a rejection, if you're like querying agents and they come back and they say, no, this is not for me, um, it's sort of not the world is not going to end, which sounds very callous, but I mean, I think it's good to put things into perspective that, these things will happen, and it's good not to, if you get sort of caught up on every time they happen, you won't be able to progress or go anywhere.
I think dealing with rejection is a definitely huge part of anything creative. I think, the successful artists that we see today, um, have probably gone through thousands of rejections that we don't see.
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely a survivor's bias in publishing, where when if you're unpublished and you're trying to get published, it's easy to walk into a bookstore and see, oh, look at all these hundreds of books that have been published. But behind that, you never see, all those hundreds of emails that get rejected by agents, and then there's hundreds of emails that get rejected by publishers, and then there's hundreds of
Mhm.
emails where the bookstore says, sorry, we're not going to stock this, but so yeah, there's all these hurdles that you have to get through.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. All right, well, and we are running out of time for today. Where can people find your stuff?
Yes, so you can find my books. So the first is Rebel Skies, and the second is Rebel Fire, with the third one coming out soon. You can find them at all good bookstores and some bad bookstores as well. Um, yeah, you can also find me on Twitter and Instagram, although my Instagram is quite glitchy. So if I don't reply to any DMs or things, it's probably because Instagram has glitched and not because I'm ignoring you.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I want to thank my guest today, and Sei Lin, for coming on the show today. Please go buy her books, Rebel Skies and Rebel Fire, available on Amazon. And of course, Beyond the Manuscripts is powered by Manuscripts, where you never write alone. And thank you again so much for being on the show.
Thank you.